Hey world, Dan Brown here, taking a look at the electoral map as it stands just a few days before the 2016 U.S. presidential election between Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and to a lesser extent, Evan McMullin and Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. Very high stakes. No matter which side of it you're on, you probably feel like the whole fate of the future of the country hinges on what happens, and you're not wrong. But one thing that keeps me calm, helps me take deep breaths, keeps my heart from skipping a beat, is taking analysis out of the realm of the subjective, out of, personality-driven analysis, and into the realm of the objective. Hard numbers, polling, taking a look at the chessboard that is the map of the United States, with each state given a value based on its population that we call electoral votes. I don't agree with the map that they present right here entirely. There are two small changes that I want to make before I call this an accurate depiction of swing states. First of all, in the South here, Georgia is a traditionally Republican state. Hasn't gone for a Democrat in quite some time. I think Bill Clinton was the last Democrat to win it. And there was a moment in this campaign when Trump was at his lowest in October after the Access Hollywood tape leaked, where Georgia kind of flitted into swing state territory, but I think it has kind of reverted to old norms. It's still close-ish, but without some, shakeup in the election. I think that Georgia is a pretty safe bet for Donald Trump to win. On the other hand, Wisconsin up here, polling just shows Wisconsin giving Hillary a fairly strong lead. I'd say 5 points to 10 points. And what really puts it over the edge is that it is an early voting state, which means that people have been voting throughout the month of October and early November here. And Hillary has, in turn, been banking the lead that she had after the debates, after the Access Hollywood tapes. So even if Trump pulls ahead narrowly in Wisconsin, by the time Election Day rolls around, it likely won't be enough to overcome the inherent advantage that Hillary has already banked. So Wisconsin, I think, is Hillary. And you'll notice that the score up here, Hillary Clinton is winning pretty decisively. She only needs 2 more electoral votes to hit the magic number of 270, which in practical terms means she only has to win one state. So Hillary has a clear advantage, but for the sake of analysis, and also just in line with what the recent media narrative has been. Voters seem to be forgetting just how bad Trump's October was, how bad his debate performances were, and now people are worried about something, Hillary's emails, FBI, Huma Abedin, and blah, blah, blah. I don't really know what the crux of the argument there is, but people really do seem to be second-guessing Hillary, doubting her trustworthiness in the wake of whatever this trumped-up story happens to be. So let's look at the map state by state through the lens of what a great night for Donald Trump looks like. And I think we should start with Arizona down here. Arizona is very interesting. It is, like Georgia, a traditionally Republican state. It has not voted for a Democrat since Bill Clinton's re-election in 1996. But burgeoning Latino population down there, combined with Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric, combined with the fact that there are many kind of sprawling suburban areas in Arizona that are traditionally Republican strongholds, kind of middle to upper middle class white voters. Many of the women in that demographic group are kind of doubting Donald Trump's support, maybe grudgingly voting for Hillary Clinton instead of the Republican nominee. So Arizona's close. I'd say it still leans in Trump's direction. It's probably about a 4-point lead for Trump, according to polling I've seen. But even if Hillary loses, which is the most likely outcome, go ahead and change it to red, by playing offense there, she forces Donald Trump to play defense there. Because, obviously, if Trump loses Arizona, it's all over. Hillary is the next president. So resources that Trump has to commit now to what it should be a traditionally Republican state are resources that could, in a different election, have been better spent in, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio. And it improves Hillary's chances of winning there, even if she doesn't quite pull through in Arizona. Next to Arizona, we have Nevada here, which is not as solidly Republican as Arizona. It has voted for Obama in recent years. Nevada also has early voting, like Wisconsin. So again, Hillary has been banking whatever lead she had in the month of October, although the most recent polling does show Trump slightly ahead in Nevada. So not unreasonable to think that, if demographically similar Arizona goes for Trump, Nevada on a Trump night very easily could, go for the Big Orange Man. That brings us to the Midwest. We have Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. It's a little complicated. I touched on this before, but Nebraska and Maine, you'll notice, are stripy here. They are the only 2 states, because of state laws, that are allowed to split their electoral votes based on congressional districts. So what that means in layman's terms is that Omaha, the city of Omaha and its surrounding area, are basically their own state for the purposes of this analysis, and that state, in quotes, is worth just 1 electoral vote. Demographically, Omaha is mostly white. It's more diverse than the rest of the state of Nebraska, but that's not saying a whole lot. But what pushes it into swing district territory is that it is very, very highly college educated, and college educated voters tend to support Democrats. It's also got kind of the same effect that we see happening in Arizona and Nevada, making those states close, where it's a pseudo-suburban area, middle to upper middle class, white voters who normally go for Republicans, but many of the women in that demographic group are uncomfortable with Trump, and so we just don't know. There hasn't been a whole lot of polling in Nebraska's 2nd district, which is ironic because much of the polling of the whole country is based in Omaha. Like Gallup, the institution that actually calls people and says who are you going to vote for, is based there. That's where the call centers are, but I digress. We don't know a whole lot about Omaha. It's in a traditionally red state. Omaha normally votes for the Republican, but in 2008 it did vote for Obama, so it's not unprecedented for it to go Hillary's way, but I would say, let's say on a Trump night, Omaha goes for Trump. Iowa, similarly, there is more polling for Iowa than we have for Omaha, but it shows a dead heat. It is a tied race, or easily within the margin of error. If it's a dead heat on a Trump night, winds blowing in his direction, I think we can safely say Iowa would then go for Donald Trump, which leads us to Ohio, and Ohio isn't even quite a dead heat. It has a small but real advantage for Donald Trump, probably ahead by about 5 percentage points there. Demographically, Ohio is a very white working class state, save for some of the urban areas, Cleveland, Cincinnati, etc. White working class voters without college educations, who tend to blame their economic situation on trade deals that Donald Trump has been hammering away at all election long. Ohio, even if it's not quite a Trump night, probably leans in Trump's direction, and no Republican for forever has won the White House without winning Ohio. Then in the Northeast here, we have New Hampshire and Maine. They are, like Iowa, like Ohio, very white, lily white, but what makes them close is that they're very highly college educated, kind of like Omaha. So New Hampshire shows an absolute dead heat, and so does Maine's, I think it's Maine's 1st congressional district. I might be wrong about that, but very, very close, very, very demographically similar. Obviously, they border each other. So on a Trump night, not unreasonable, once again, to assume that both Maine's 1 congressional district and New Hampshire go for Trump. So that leaves us with North Carolina and Florida, the 2 swing states in the American South. Now, if you'll recall, during the Democratic primary campaign, Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders, pundits like to refer to the South as Clinton's, quote, firewall. Her margins with black voters in the South were so huge, to quote Bernie Sanders, that, even with Bernie's late momentum in, states farther north, it wasn't enough to penetrate the just huge margins that Hillary racked up. And I think that same basic principle applies in the general election, but to a smaller extent, obviously. In the Democratic primary, only Democrats are voting. Black voters make up a much larger percentage of the Democratic Party than the electorate at large. So, Republicans are going to have their say, but polling seems to indicate that Clinton has a small advantage in North Carolina and a slightly bigger but still small advantage in Florida as well. And those advantages are compounded by the fact that both of these states, just like Wisconsin, just like Nevada, are early voting states. So throughout the month of October, when Trump was at his weakest, people were actively going to the polls, voting, and you have to assume that, Hillary benefits from that. So If I had to guess, if nothing major changes, nothing major breaks that shakes up the fundamental nature of the race in its final days, as people are thinking about Hillary, emails, something, throughout the rest of the country, I still think it's going to be really hard for Trump to win North Carolina and Florida. And I would lock in this right here, 312 to 226, as my official prediction as to what we're going to be looking at on election night. But if the wind's blowing really strongly in Trump's direction, if the Republicans are successful in some of their voter suppression efforts in North Carolina and Florida, as troubling as that may be, it's not impossible. And in fact, I'd say this is the most likely path that Donald Trump has to a victory on election night. That's winning North Carolina and Florida, along with everything else that's red on the map here. But you'll notice this is a very precarious position. He is only winning, he has exactly 270. He can't afford to lose, well, actually, he can afford to lose one electoral vote, and let's talk through that situation right now. Nebraska and Maine, like we touched on earlier, can split their electoral votes. So going from this map to, say, Hillary winning all of Maine, suddenly we have a tie. Or she could win Omaha instead of that district in Maine. I digress. A tie is probably more likely in this election than it has been in many, many recent elections, all because Maine and Nebraska both have swing districts. If no candidate reaches 270 electoral votes, then things get really complicated, and it might be a fitting, dramatic end to an insane election season. The House of Representatives would get to vote for the next president, but it's not quite that simple. It's not the current House. It's the House that will be sworn in on January 3rd based on the election results. And it's not like each of the 400 some odd members of the House have one vote. It's each state's delegations of representatives get one vote. So effectively there are 50 points distributed between the two candidates. The Republicans will almost definitely have more state delegations worth of votes if it comes to that, which most years would mean that the Republican would win the presidency, right? But as has been much publicized over the last month, Trump is not super popular among congressional Republicans. They would probably still vote for him, but maybe not without some fireworks. Also, if Republican members of the House are in states that voted for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump, they might feel some amount of pressure to vote against their own party just because the people of their state voted for Hillary over Trump. They rejected Trump, and it might put their re-election in 2 years in peril. In a tie, goes to the House, state delegations each get one vote. Trump likely emerges as the next president in that situation. But here's where it gets really batty. The vice presidency is voted on by the new Senate, and the new Senate is likely to be controlled by Democrats. So if the electoral vote comes out as a tie, the most likely situation is that Donald Trump would be the next president, and Tim Kaine would be the next vice president. So we'd have a Republican in the White House and then a Democrat as his vice president. It's just kooky. It's weird. I have no idea what sort of implications that would have. It is entirely unprecedented. There's not a whole lot that we can look to in recent history that would indicate what politics would look like for the next 4 years in America in that situation. But like I said, this is a very strong showing for Donald Trump. This is Trump overperforming where he's at in the polls right now. Let's do what we did for Trump now for Hillary Clinton instead and show what a good night for her might be. So Nevada goes for her, Arizona goes for her. Let's say that she wins Nebraska's congressional district here, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, there it is, Florida, New Hampshire, and then let's say that Maine is entirely blue. This map, I find it really interesting. Many pundits have floated the idea that this could be a, quote, realignment election. There's this trope in political science circles that, every 40 years or so, the American electorate kind of, in a sudden move, redefines itself. For example, in 1968, in reaction to the civil rights movement, the South, which had been very consistently voting for Democratic candidates for president, pivoted all at once to voting against Democrats, who they saw as, they rightfully saw as supporting the civil rights movement, which they did not like very much. And they've stayed in the Republican column ever since. So many pundits, implied that this could very well be a realignment election. Except this map, a great night for Hillary Clinton, doesn't bear that thesis out. This is very, very similar to the map that Obama won with in 2008. The only difference is you have to switch Arizona for, if it'll go, no, there it goes. You have to switch Arizona there for Indiana. And then this is literally state by state, district by district, the map that Obama won with in 2008. Now, the electoral vote totals are a little bit different because we reapportion electoral votes every time there's a census. And so, Republicans still have a few more votes here than they did in 2008. But this seems to indicate that rather than a paradigm where every once in a while there's just a shocking election that just changes the dynamic of presidential elections for the next 40 years. We've moved to this place where, the electorate is so polarized. People are so set in their ways and which party they tend to vote for that only long-term demographic trends are going to cause the electoral map to kind of gradually evolve. So we see it with Indiana, states that are working class, white, are now becoming a little bit more consistently Republican. Meanwhile, in the Southwest, Democrats are gaining from, burgeoning Latino populations, and just the growth of cities in, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado. There are a lot of, migrants from within the United States just deciding to relocate there. The one other situation that I want to touch on is the potential that, there is some inherent flaw in current polling. And you hear a lot of this from the Trump camp, that it's rigged, that the polling is rigged. I mean, I don't really know what the logic there is. I don't know how it really benefits Hillary to have the polling rigged against Trump. There is, though, something called the Bradley effect. It originated in a governor's race in California, I want to say in the 80s. A guy named Bradley, he was a black man, candidate for governor. Polling showed him winning pretty decisively. But then Election Day rolled around, and he lost, and not by a close margin. And what political scientists discovered is that when people were asked on the phone, who will you be voting for, those who held, deep-seated racist views against a black candidate did not want to admit to another human being, even if it's just over the phone, that they were voting against the black man. So they lied. They said, yeah, I'll vote for Bradley. And then when in the privacy of the voting booth, in fact, voted against Bradley. It's possible, not likely necessarily, I tend to trust the polling, but I think it's possible that many women across the country who have husbands, boyfriends who are gung-ho Trump supporters might hold a kind of silent doubt about Trump, where, if they're asked in polls and their husband happens to be in the room, even if they're thinking about voting for Hillary, thinking about not voting for Trump, they might not say as much. And if that is true, you might see a landslide for Hillary Clinton, unlike anything we've seen since, the landslides that Ronald Reagan won with in the 1980s. States like Texas have flirted with becoming swing states. Georgia, like I said earlier, has flirted with being a swing state. Missouri, to a lesser extent. Utah is interesting. It is a solidly conservative state, but there is an independent candidate, Evan McMullin, who is from Utah. He's Mormon, just like much of the Beehive State's electorate. And many of the, very religious voters in Utah can't stomach the idea of Trump's rhetoric against women, rhetoric against minorities, and they're looking for a third option. But that might be enough to tip the scales in Hillary's direction or in McMullin's direction, in which case you just have no votes from there. A map looking like this, I think, is very unlikely, but within the realm of possibility, if women decide to, in the privacy of the voting booth, reject Trump flatly. To reiterate, Donald Trump needs to run the table. He needs to win literally every swing state in order to have a decisive 270 electoral vote win. He can afford to lose either Nebraska or Maine's one-off congressional district and likely still win, but then he'd have to deal with Tim Kaine as vice president. Meanwhile, Hillary only has to win Nevada, or win North Carolina, or win Florida, or she has just so many paths to 270 electoral votes. It seems likely that she will be our next president. I think that 538 and the New York Times have her probability somewhere hovering around 80 to 85%, which means that, if Trump wins, it would be not quite a once-in-a-lifetime odds-defying performance. I mean, yeah, the Cubs coming back and winning the World Series after being down 3-1. They faced probably about the same odds that Trump does. So follow the media. If nothing major changes, Hillary will likely win. If something major comes out of this something email, FBI something, then Trump could well barely squeak out a victory. Or if another bombshell about Donald Trump's treatment of women or minorities or whatever it may be comes out, then Hillary could win with a pretty strong landslide. So that's my analysis. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think that there's some deep inherent flaw, or if you have just a little factoid that might help me understand what's going on a little bit more in your neck of the woods. Just leave a comment, or I don't know. Do whatever people do on YouTube these days. Post a meme me.